Many atheist scholars believe the Bible copied ancient texts, but that it was fabricated in 250 BC. The scholars translating the Bible would not have had access to the ancient texts these scholars claim the Bible copied, right? Do we even know what was available at the Library of Alexandria? Yes. And our instinct here is directionally correct. And the claim that the Hebrew Bible was fabricated wholesale around 250 BC by copying earlier ancient texts runs into serious historical and logistical problems once we slow it down and look at what was actually available to whom and when. So let's walk through this carefully and soberly because this topic is often discussed with far more certainty than the evidence allows. What atheist scholars usually claim? The strong form of the claim is usually something like, the Hebrew Bible was largely composed of or edited around the Hellenistic period 300 to 200 BC, borrowing from earlier Mesopotamian myths, Gilgamesh, Atrahasis, Enuma Elish, Hittite treaties, Egyptian wisdom texts, possibly via access to collections like the Library of Alexandria. This is huge speculation. That sounds tidy, but historically, it does not hold up cleanly. 1. Did Bible translators or editors have access to the ancient source texts? Almost certainly not in the way the claim assumes. Key problems. Languages. Mesopotamian texts were written in Sumerian, Akkadian, Old Babylonian, Assyrian, Hittite. By 250 BC, very few people on earth could read these, and almost none in Judea. Scripts. These texts were written in cuneiform, not alphabetic scripts. Cuneiform literacy had already collapsed by the Hellenistic period. Even in Mesopotamia, cuneiform schools were fading. Transmission barriers. There is no evidence of systematic translation of Mesopotamian mythological tablets into Hebrew. There is no evidence of Hebrew scribes being trained in Akkadian or Sumerian in the 3rd century BC. Modern scholars themselves required 19th to 20th century archaeology to rediscover and translate these texts. If Hellenistic Jews had such access, we would expect explicit linguistic fingerprints, direct loan translations, syntax carryover, or Akkadianisms, but we don't see that pattern. What about the Library of Alexandria? This is where the argument often sounds compelling, but collapses on inspection. What we do know about the Library of Alexandria, found in early 3rd century BC under Ptolemy I. Primarily collected Greek literature, philosophy, science, mathematics, some Egyptian works, often in Greek translation. What we do not know. We do not have a catalog. We do not know what percentage of Near Eastern material it held. We do not know whether Hebrew scribes had access. We do not know whether untranslated cuneiform tablets were present. Importantly, there is zero evidence that the library held original Mesopotamian myth tablets in usable form for Hebrew authors. Even if some ancient texts were present, they would likely be untranslated, stored as antiquities, accessible to elite Greek scholars, not Judean priests. The Septuagint changes the direction of influence. Here's a key inversion many people miss. The Septuagint, or LXX, translated from Hebrew into Greek, produced 3rd to 2nd century BC in Alexandria, presupposes existing Hebrew source texts. If the Hebrew Bible were fabricated in Alexandria, why translate it out of Hebrew? Why preserve Semitic grammar structures awkwardly in Greek? Why not compose it directly in Greek? The Septuagint shows Hebrew textual traditions already existed and were important enough to preserve, not invent. 4. We know Hebrew texts existed long before 250 BC. This is not speculative, it's archaeological. Examples. Ketef Hinnom silver scrolls, 7th century BC. Priestly blessing from Numbers. Lachish letters, pre-exilic Hebrew. Dead Sea Scrolls, 3rd century BC onward, shows textual stability, not sudden invention. Internal biblical references to monarchies, geography, and institutions long gone by Hellenistic times. You cannot credibly compress all of this into a 250 BC fabrication window. 5. Similarity does not equal copying. This is where the argument usually overreaches. Ancient Near Eastern cultures shared cosmological questions, used similar literary forms, employed treaty structures, genealogies, and flood motifs. But shared genre is not plagiarism. For example, Hittite treaty forms explain why biblical covenants looked that way, not that they were copied in Alexandria. Flood stories differ sharply in theology, ethics, and narrative purpose. Genesis often argues against surrounding myths rather than adopting them. Bottom line, clean and precise. No, we have no evidence that Hebrew biblical authors had access to Mesopotamian myth tablets. Those tablets were translated into Hebrew. The Library of Alexandria functioned as a myth copying workshop. The Hebrew Bible was fabricated wholesale around 250 BC. Yes, we do know that Hebrew texts predate the Hellenistic period. The Septuagint presupposes earlier Hebrew originals. The Library of Alexandria's holdings are largely unknown. Claims of direct copying exceed the available evidence. A much more cautious scholarly position, even among secular historians, is the Hebrew Bible emerged over centuries within Israelite culture, interacting with its Near Eastern environment, but not fabricated ex nihilo from foreign texts in Alexandria. How many years would have passed between all of the writings the Bible is accused of copying and the Library of Alexandria? Short answer, hundreds to over 1,000 years separate the ancient texts, often alleged as sources, and the founding of the Library of Alexandria. When you line the dates up cleanly, the copying narrative becomes chronologically strained. How many years would have passed between all of the writings the Bible is accused of copying and the Library of Alexandria? Short answer, hundreds to over 1,000 years separate the ancient texts, often alleged as sources, and the founding of the Library of Alexandria. When you line the dates up cleanly, the copying narrative becomes chronologically strained. So here is a precise timeline comparison. Anchor point, the Library of Alexandria, founded 295 to 280 BC, patronage Ptolemy I and II, context early Hellenistic Greek scholarship. 1. Epic of Gilgamesh. Earliest Sumerian stories 2100 BC, standard Akkadian version 1300 to 1000 BC, time gap to Alexandria 800 to 1200 years. 2. Atrahasis epic flood narrative, written 1700 BC, time gap 1400 years. 3. Enuma Elish, Babylonian creation myth, written 1600 to 1100 BC, after the Yahwist creation story of Genesis 2, verse 4. Time gap 900 to 1300 years. 4. Code of Hammurabi, written 1754 BC, time gap 1450 years. 5. Hittite suzerainty treaties, Hittite Empire, written 1400 to 1200 BC, time gap 900 to 1100 years. 6. Egyptian wisdom literature, e.g. Instruction of Amenemope, written 1300 to 1100 BC, time gap 800 to 1000 years. Why this gap matters? To sustain the claim the Bible copied these texts via Alexandria, all of the following would have to be true simultaneously. 1. Texts survived intact for over 1,000 plus years. 2. They were still readable. Cuneiform literacy had largely collapsed. 3. They were present in Alexandria. Unproven. 4. They were translated into a Semitic language. No evidence. 5. Hebrew scribes had access to them. No evidence. 6. The borrowing left no linguistic trail. Implausible. That is a stack of assumptions, not a documented historical chain. Key conclusion. Tight and defensible. The writings the Bible is accused of copying were composed 800 to 1500 years before the Library of Alexandria even existed. This does not mean Israelite authors lived in a vacuum. They clearly existed in the broader ancient Near Eastern world, but it does mean that claims of late Hellenistic fabrication via Alexandrian sources are chronologically and logistically weak. Was each text discovered in modern times, and what is the probability for each that it would be in the Library of Alexandria? So here's a clean, evidence-based answer that separates what we know from what we don't and what is often assumed without proof. So I'll give you when each text was rediscovered in modern times, whether it could realistically have been in the Library of Alexandria, and a probability estimate, low, extremely low, near zero, with justification. Anchor, the Library of Alexandria, yet again, founded 295 to 280 BC, primary language is Greek. Access, elite Greek scholars, not provincial priesthoods. Catalog, lost holdings unknown in detail. This uncertainty matters. Probability estimates must stay conservative. 1. Epic of Gilgamesh. Modern discovery, 1853 to 1872, excavated at Nineveh, translated after decipherment of Akkadian cuneiform. Flood tablet translated by George Smith in 1872. No one on Earth could read this text between 100 AD and 1850 AD. Probability it was in Alexandria, extremely low, between 1 to 3%. Why? Written in Akkadian cuneiform, required a dying scribal tradition, no evidence of Greek translation, tablets found buried in Assyrian ruins, not Mediterranean libraries. 2. Atrahasis Epic. Modern discovery, 1901, excavated in Sippar, modern Iraq, fully translated mid-20th century. Probability it was in Alexandria, near zero, less than 1%. Why? Highly technical scribal text, no literary popularity outside Mesopotamia, no evidence of translation or circulation, even rarer than Gilgamesh. 3. Enuma Elish. Modern discovery, 1849 to 1876. Found in Ashurbanipal's library. Required advanced cuneiform decipherment. Probability it was in Alexandria, extremely low. Less than 1 to 2%. Why? Ritual cult text tied to Babylonian New Year. Politically obsolete after Babylon's fall. No known Greek philosophical use. No transmission chain to Egypt. 4. Code of Hammurabi. Modern discovery, 1901. Found at Susa, Iran. Was removed as war booty in antiquity. Probability it was in Alexandria, low but highest on the list, 5 to 10%. Why slightly higher? Legal texts were sometimes summarized. Greeks were interested in law systems, but no evidence of Greek translation. Hebrew law does not mirror Hammurabi structurally. Differences outweigh similarities. 5. Hittite suzerainty treaties. Modern discovery, 1906, excavated at Hattusa, Bogaskoy, Turkey, language unknown before discovery. Probability it was in Alexandria, near zero, less than 1%. Why? Language not understood even in antiquity outside Anatolia. Political documents, not literature. Structure matches biblical covenants, but that indicates shared ancient practice, not copying. 6. Egyptian wisdom literature, Amenemopi. Modern discovery, 1888 to 1920, found in Egypt, written in hieratic Egyptian. Probability it was in Alexandria, moderate, 15 to 25%. Why higher? Egyptian texts were sometimes translated into Greek. Alexandria is in Egypt. Wisdom genre overlaps culturally, but crucially, Proverbs does not equal Amenemopi verbatim. Hebrew text often reshapes or critiques ideas. Influence does not equal fabrication. The critical insight most people miss. If modern scholars required archaeology, lost languages, and decades of decipherment to access these texts, ancient Judean scribes almost certainly did not have them. And if they had, we would expect explicit linguistic fingerprints. We would expect Greek intermediary texts. We would expect citations or polemics. We would expect late uniformity, not deep textual layering. We see none of that. Bottom line, very clean. Most alleged source texts were unknown until the 19th and 20th centuries. Their probability of being accessible in Alexandria is very low. Similarities are better explained by shared ancient Near Eastern cultural frameworks, common human questions, covenant and wisdom traditions, not plagiarism. The Alexandrian fabrication theory overstates certainty far beyond the evidence.